Thank you guys for joining us today for the Lunch and Learn. I am Britton Ryan Guerin. I am an associate attorney at Maine Center for Elder Law. I practice estate planning and elder law and probate administration. And today I'm here with Mary Catherine Brennan, and we are going to discuss for you powers of attorney, advanced health care directives, guardianships, and the things that you can do to help protect yourself and your assets. Rather than screaming over you, I'm going to come over here. All right, is this better? Is this on? Yeah. So I I've been in town for about 11 years. I do like to tell people a little bit about why I do elder law and why I say it chose me. I am from away, very far away. Originally from Alabama. I moved to Boston for undergrad, and that was many years ago. I had always been very focused on criminal law. I was very tunnel vision. I got a undergraduate degree in criminal justice, and I did not even take the elder law elective when I was in law school. And after I had passed the Massachusetts bar, my mother was diagnosed at a very young age with terminal cancer. So as an only child, I quickly went back home and became a caregiver. And for anyone who's ever done it, it is not an easy job, a thankless task, but you step up and you do what you need to do when it needs to happen. And so for about a year, I took care of both my mother and my grandmother for the last year of their life. And when after they had passed away, I moved back to Boston and had a very wonderful man waiting for me that happened to be a York native. You guys raise them well up here, by the way. And we got engaged, and it was like a light switch. He wanted to come home. So I moved to Maine, took another bar exam, and that was about 11 years, 3 kids ago. So after my mom and grandmother passed away, I decided that criminal law did not have the sway that it once had for me, and I really wanted to do something that helped people like all the people had helped me when I was taking care of my family. And so decided I wanted to be an elder law attorney, but then had to figure out what that meant. So I went back to school to figure out what that meant and have been loving the work that I've been doing for the past 10 years. So thank you for coming, and I hope that we provide you some good information on how you guys can plan ahead of time and hope to avoid some crises.
And hi, I'm Mary Catherine Brennan. I actually am a York native and also an elder law attorney. Britton and I have very similar practices. It's nice to have her in town because frequently when folks call me and I can't help them, I can send them over to her, and the reverse is true as well. My focus has always been elder law. When I graduated from law school, I worked for Maine Legal Services for the Elderly, and have represented clients in front of the Maine Superior Court, Probate Court, District Court, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services and the Office of Medicare Hearings. So we're going to talk about, again, today, healthcare directives, durable financial powers of attorney, and guardianships and conservatorships. I think we're going to focus a little more time on the pre-planning aspect because all of you are here. You are bright-eyed, you're bushy-tailed, you can plan ahead and avoid being in a situation where you need a guardianship or conservatorship. That is what we resort to when we haven't planned ahead and we have no other options. So we are going to go through, I have a PowerPoint presentation just so that we keep on pace and cover the material that we promised we would cover for you. And so I'll present some of the more technical requirements, and then Britton is going to elaborate, and if we have any war stories, we can do that. I think that if you have questions, you should feel free to raise your hand and ask them as we go. Does that work for you, Britton? All right, so let's get to it. So the first question is, when folks come into our office and they're thinking about estate planning, tends to be a real focus on what happens to my assets when I die, right? And of course, managing that transition in an orderly way is always beneficial. But I'm frankly more concerned about who's going to help you make your decisions if you're alive and you're unable to speak for yourself. Because there are a lot of people who have statutory priority to do that, and some of them may be a better choice than others, right? And this is where you get to say, while you're clear incapacitated, what you would want if you became incapacitated. And I don't know to what extent, Britton and I both do some long-term care planning, and all of the techniques that we're using for pre-planning for surrogate decision makers are critical if we later want to plan for long-term care.
Yeah, oftentimes, as Mary Catherine had said, people come in and say, oh, I need a will. I was told I need a will. So, well, they're helpful, but you'll be dead. And so I'm more concerned about what we can do to help you while you're here. And as Mary Catherine said, there are statutory provisions for your assets being disposed of and distributed upon your death. Might not be where you want them to go, but there are ways in which to have your estate distributed if you die without a will. If you do not have a power of attorney and you have not chosen someone to speak for you before your incapacity, then that's when we have to get into a situation with a guardianship or conservatorship. I do them, Mary Catherine does them, I don't know, but I'm guessing she probably dislikes them as much as I do. So with a power of attorney, one of the things, and Mary Catherine can elaborate on this as well, I tend to do immediately effective powers of attorney. So if you come into my office and you say, all right, I would like to do a power of attorney, I would like to appoint someone as my agent to work on my behalf if I am ever incapacitated and cannot do so on my own. Somebody that would be able to handle your financial affairs, someone that would be able to sign contracts on your behalf, someone that you trust with everything, because that person that you choose and give that authority to will be able to go into a bank, open accounts, close accounts, mortgage property, buy property, sell, you name it, and they could do it. And so one of the things that we have to distinguish when you come in is whether or not the power of attorney will be immediately effective or if it will be what's called a springing power of attorney. I tend to do powers of attorney that are immediately effective, meaning that when you sign them, whoever you have appointed as your agent, they immediately have authority when given that piece of paper to go to the bank, to open accounts, and to work on your behalf. I do that so that they can be as beneficial to you as possible. Oftentimes I have people who come into my office and they have what's called a springing power of attorney. A power of attorney that is only has the authority when you're incapacitated, when a doctor has deemed you incapacitated. The problem is oftentimes I see people in my office, agents of people, that they're at the hospital, they might be immobile, but they're not incapacitated. And so that power of attorney isn't effective yet. Do you have a preference on that?
I definitely echo Britton's preference on that because, if you think about it, and we'll talk about it more, I think, throughout the whole presentation, this is the crux of it. Most people don't go from capacitated today to incapacitated tomorrow, right? There's an arc, and you're always improving and declining. And you don't want to have to wait to get assistance from your trusted surrogate decision maker until your physician's actually going to declare you incapacitated, right? Understandably, your physician should be concerned about doing that because declaring you incapacitated has the effect of limiting a number of rights that you currently have. Whereas if that financial power of attorney was effective immediately, it becomes more of a shared surrogate decision making where the person who has declining capacity is making decisions in as much as they're still able to about issues that they're still able to field and they've got support from their surrogate decision maker. For logistics, again, if someone's physically incapacitated but cognitively right there, if the document isn't effective, who's going to go do the real estate closing for you? Who's going to deal with your checks when they come in from the bank?
And I would just also like to add, it also doesn't have to be incapacity. Can people hear me? This microphone thing's killing me. It also doesn't have to be, people when they come in, I think oftentimes people think of powers of attorney as a document that you need, when you're in the hospital, when, you're incapacitated and incapable of doing some of this work. I also like to say, make your agent work for you. If you have, and your agent, we should say, it could be a spouse, it could be a child, it could be a sibling, it could be a friend, anyone that you trust, you can appoint as that agent under the power of attorney. And I say, hopefully, while you're on vacation, if you need some money wired to you, if you need something handled in your absence, make them work for you. So it doesn't always have to be an incapacity situation either. It can be, you don't feel like going to the bank, so send someone else.
And this is an anecdote that I'll tell because my parents are in the room and it's about them, where the joke was my mom, bless her heart, stayed home with my sister and I for years and years. And the joke was that these checks would come in my father's name and the bank would cash them for my mother, his agent under the power of attorney. But if he went into the bank, they were like, excuse me, sir, I'm going to need to see a few forms of ID, even though his name was the name on the check. So it's often just convenient, right? If there are people that you work closely with, they can just take care of tasks for you without having to wait until incapacity. I think that Britton and I have covered most of these issues, but the highlights to consider when you're dealing with a durable financial power of attorney are durability, meaning even after you become incapacitated, the power endures, and the default is that those powers are durable. That you include financial powers. There's always a general grant of power, and then there are special powers that we think more closely about and have to be specifically included, or they're not part of the powers that your agent has. And two of the big ones are gifting and trust creation. I'm going to let Britton tell you why in a moment. We talked about whether a power is effective immediately or whether it springs into effectiveness upon your incapacity. And I think we've both expressed a clear preference for that being effective immediately. I mean, I'll do a springing power of attorney if someone's just, really doesn't want to do one, and I want there to be something in place to avoid a guardianship and conservatorship in the worst case scenario. Yes, sir.
You keep using the word incapacitated.
Yep.
Is it physically or mentally or both? And who determines?
It depends on what the document says. Oh, okay. That's great. Britton told me to repeat the question, which is a good idea. So the question was incapacitated. Does that mean physically or mentally? And who decides? So you can write into your documents how it is determined that you are incapacitated. Most often it is one or more licensed physicians. It could be your primary care physician. I've also seen clients drafted in that the majority of their children could say in writing that they felt they were incapable of making financial decisions. But it really is the cognitive capacity to decide. It's not And communicate that. It's not an issue of physical incapacity.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We always, it makes my skin crawl when someone comes in and they have a power of attorney, which is a great start, but then it just appoints their spouse and there's no alternate agent in a younger generation, okay? So we always say to clients, as many people as you have in your life that you trust and would be a good candidate to assist you with these tasks, just put them in there. And it also designates who you would want to serve as a conservator of finances. Gifting and trust creation is something that I generally want to include. My guess is Britton does too, and she will tell you why.
So I'm going to back up for a minute to answer that question. One of the things that I know in making the skin crawl, one of the questions that I often get is, you're an elder law attorney. Am I old enough to come see you? I've had people ask me that seriously. So, one of the things that we should have started with is, as an elder law attorney, what I tell people is I'm an estate planner with benefits knowledge. And really, my ideal client are people are my age, our age, all right, my age because I'm older, people that are young and, ideally, I will grow older with them. My definition of old, by the way, has drastically changed since working as an elder law attorney. Because, by the way, I have seen some really old 55-year-olds and I have seen some really young 99-year-olds. I have a 99-year-old client who comes in and takes notes and keeps me on my toes. So one of the things is, when do you need this document, first of all? And I would say anybody over 18. As our flyer said, if you are a legal adult, this is not a document that, there's any reason to wait. And just to go back to what we were talking about earlier, when my mother had passed away, I had a friend of mine back in Alabama who I had appointed as my agent, and I got tired of going back and forth to Alabama. So when we finally sold my family home, I had him do the closing. He was not happy that he had to sign what you have to sign when you're acting as an agent under a power of attorney, but it's that type of convenience sometimes that comes in handy. So when people are coming in and doing some pre-planning, and saying, I would like to get my affairs in order, I was told I need these estate planning documents. One of the things that I personally do is when I am drafting these documents, like Mary Catherine said, I want to have at least one initial agent. We could probably both talk about co-agents and why we wouldn't necessarily recommend them. But one initial agent, at least one successor agent, if not a slew of people, that if something were to happen to that initial agent, that you already have someone in place. I want to keep those documents as flexible as possible. And then also, I draft my powers of attorney to be pretty inclusive of all of the powers, including the trust making and the gifting that Mary Catherine had mentioned. Because even if you're, quite young and, long-term care and estate planning are a little down the road, I still want you to come in and be taken care of in case those are the last documents that you're able to draft. Any of the documents that we mentioned today, they are able to be revoked and amended as long as you have capacity. Quite honestly, I tell my clients, I'm drafting these and assuming that you will lose capacity next week, because something can always happen. Nobody is ever, guaranteed any more time or health than anybody else. And so when you walk out with the document, I want to make sure that it is at least as beneficial as I can make it that day. So the trust making is, and the gifting, like Mary Catherine had said, there are a few provisions that specifically need to be spelled out. And as elder law attorneys, we are always thinking long-term care, benefits eligibility, what happens down the road. And we want to see those two provisions because, for instance, if you come in and you have done a very comprehensive power of attorney, you have appointed, say, your son as the agent, and you've included that trust making and the gifting provisions, then 10, 15, however many years down the road, when your son comes in and says, all right, mom and dad, something's happened, they've gone to a facility, and I'm here because I would like to do some planning. I would like to do some long-term care planning, some asset preservation, and we might need to even start talking about main care. Well, without that trust-making provision, I'm limited in what I can do with your agent. That's limiting the scope of the estate planning that I can actually do on your behalf through your agent, as well as gifting, because more than likely that son that is your agent is also going to be the beneficiary of a lot of what your estate planning would end up giving. And so if he doesn't have the ability to gift to himself specifically, then again, we're limited. So again, we want to see broad powers and broad authority. And so that's why, I tell people everything but the kitchen sink tends to go in my documents.
And just because there's broad power embedded in the documents doesn't mean that there are leashes you can't put on them. You know, at times in our office, I know we'll say that a photocopy is not effective as an original, so there are immediate live powers, there's the ability to gift, but sometimes they have to go find the original, and guess who has the original? Me, right? So when your son calls me and is like, oh, Mrs. Smith is in the hospital and I need that power of attorney right now, what's the first thing I'm doing? I'm calling Mrs. Smith. And if she answers the phone and says, I have no idea why he's contacting you, right? Uh-oh, we want to revoke that power of attorney and think about someone else. You know, there are definitely situations where we meet with folks and they say, listen, you know, my agent is extremely trustworthy, low risk. I just want it to be effective immediately. I want a photocopy to be effective, and that's fine by me as long as we've had that conversation privately. Okay. When we're talking about the power of attorney, as Britton said, it's really a principal-agent relationship. As long as you know what's going on, you're the boss. Right? So your agent can't make decisions for you that contravene what you tell them to do. It has to be, as far as execution requirements, it has to be signed by the principal. It has to be notarized, and additional witnesses are optional, but we recommend them. The other thing is, financial powers of attorney in Maine have two very specific notices that are required. And I would definitely, unlike an advanced healthcare directive where I think you can be in good shape with the Maine Hospital Association form, with a financial power of attorney, I would recommend going to see an attorney, because if those I've seen cases where a power of attorney had statutory notices, but they were outdated and someone couldn't close on a real estate deal. So it's one of those things where it's a technical requirement, it seems small, but getting it right can save you a lot of hassle on the back end. Is there anything you want to add about financial powers of attorney?
I think we've covered it.
All right.
I think we have.
Oh,
what about you guys?
How do you really guarantee that the agent won't begin gifting himself liberally?
The question was, how do you guarantee that the agent will not be gifting to him or herself liberally? And the answer is, we can't, right? Unless we've put on some of those leashes, like I said, where a photocopy isn't effective as an original, and it has to go through a gatekeeper. That is one of the few benefits of conservatorships, which is that if you don't have a financial power of attorney that allows gifting, your agent would have to go to court in order to make gifts, including gifts from one spouse to another spouse. And then the agent would have to report all of your assets to the court and provide annual accountings of all of the income and all of the expenditures of your estate. So I will say, if you do have any concerns about the person that you would consider appointing a financial agent, find someone else, including a professional, right? But the cost of going through a court process in order to have your finances managed is extremely expensive and creates delays. I'm going to let Britton riff on that one as well.
As much as I had said, I'm all about an immediately effective power of attorney. The one time and the one situation that I will do springing powers of attorney is when clients come to me and say, you know what, I don't have any family, I don't have a lot of friends. They're trying to kind of cobble together the fiduciaries that they're going to lean on in times of incapacity. And that's a situation, if you have a neighbor that you feel you can trust that you're going to appoint as that agent, that is fine. There's no requirements as to who you're appointing for these positions. But if it's a situation where you're like, I think I can trust them, I hope I can trust them, but I'm not quite so sure, maybe that's the situation in which we put a few more constraints. Maybe we do, at that point, do a springing so that power of attorney is only effective upon incapacity when you really are needing that assistance. Or I often tell clients too, as far as the original, also, they can't do anything on your behalf without at least a copy. And so I say, let's go ahead and do it so that when you need it, it's done, but don't give them a copy, because without that copy, they can't take it to the bank and do anything for you. But unfortunately, to answer your question, we're going to hope that the agent that you're appointing recognizes that they do have a duty under that power of attorney to benefit you, not themselves. Yes.
Was a follow-up. What about structuring it so that copies of any of your statements go to another trusted individual or to the attorney, so that something can be spotted?
I think anything like that you have in place, that's also a situation, even though I'm not a big fan of co-agents, having two people appointed, sometimes things like that would help. But I'm trying to think of a situation where you don't necessarily, just because you have someone working as your agent, doesn't mean you have given up the ability to receive those statements, to review things. And hopefully, if you have an agent and another trusted family member or friend, you can kind of have people working together in checks and balances. Was there anybody else have any other questions about powers of attorney? Yes.
So does geography matter? If you've got family in another state or 8-hour drive away, is it better to have something close by, both in the durable power of attorney and the medical power of attorney, that's something local? Does that help you? Does that help us?
So I will defer to Mary Catherine for her answer, but I typically say that, and I'm sorry, the question was, does distance matter for who you are selecting to serve as your agents under either the financial power or the advanced health care directive? And typically I say no. If you have an only child and they happen to live in California and that is the person that you are trusting and wanting to appoint as your agent, with modern technology, oftentimes I don't meet my agents, so emails, faxes, and that type of thing. If you have, 3 children and that they are equally trustworthy, sometimes people come in and assume that they have to appoint their oldest child. And if that oldest child is the one that lives in California, but the one that lives in Wells is equally trustworthy, then I say maybe go ahead and consider appointing the one in Wells, just for a convenient standpoint. I typically say if you have equally trustworthy people that you're looking to appoint and there is someone that is closer, maybe for the advanced health care directive, you might want to take location in mind, because if you are in a hospital or emergency situation and you're looking for that emergency contact and that agent to show up, then obviously distance would matter. Do you have?
I am generally more concerned about aptitude than location, right? So if you have one potential candidate who's very organized, detail-oriented, would know when they needed help, particularly on the financial side, that's the person I would recommend. I frequently have clients appoint one person for the financial power of attorney and then another person for the healthcare directive, who they think is going to be better suited to carry out their healthcare wishes. It's not uncommon at all for me to have clients appoint, a child as a financial agent and a friend with a few backups as a healthcare agent, because they're concerned about their children's ability to carry out their wishes if they were in a persistent vegetative state or an irreversible coma. Does that echo your experience? And then, of course, you also get the situations where daughter's an accountant and son is a nurse, right? And often, we appoint them and then the backup for the opposite. So you've got 2 people. I will say that in our office, when it comes to powers of attorney, in particular, we actually have not had too much trouble appointing multiple agents, as long as we make it very clear that they're jointly and severally appointed. And that allows 2 people to kind of split up the tasks and share the burden. And that's typically, we do that in cases where there's no clear front runner, or all the kids are overwhelmed. They've all got kids at home, but they all want to help out. So that's just been our experience in the office. Go ahead.
You have to update the power of attorney. Is there a certain time limit that
The question was, do you need to update the power of attorney? And the answer is, as long as it was effective when it was executed, it should remain effective indefinitely.
And that goes for different states.
Ooh, feel that?
I was just going to add that it also goes for different states. And so, sometimes if you have moved from Florida or Massachusetts and you come here and you have a Massachusetts power of attorney, they are still valid and they should still be recognized. And as long as Mary Catherine was saying, they were effective where and when they were executed, then you should be fine. With that being said,
Asterisk. Asterisk on that.
There's always a but with lawyers. We always do recommend that upon the life event or a move that you have your documents reviewed. If you have lost some of the people that you have appointed as agents, then you might want to re-examine your documents to make sure that you still have a sufficient number of surrogates to step in. If you have moved, there are some different requirements, and I don't know, are you licensed in New Hampshire now? I am not, neither of us are licensed in New Hampshire, but I know.
So you're not listening to what we're about to say to you.
You're not. What I have heard from New Hampshire licensed attorneys, there is a requirement that I think they have a letter of incapacity for the authority of the power of attorney to actually generate or spring into action. And so oftentimes I have friends in New Hampshire saying, well, you need that power, that letter of incapacity. I'm like, no, you don't. So some states do have different requirements. So if you are moving to a new state and planning on staying there, it might just be worth it to have someone at least review them. Yes?
Regarding the health proxy, you go to the York Hospital, something tragic happens to you, and you now have to go to Boston. So your health proxy, who might not be a full-time resident of Maine, you're now in another hospital, which is not in where the health proxy's from. How do you cover that in a health proxy? Is it, or say you're in Boston and you're just traveling there and you need to be brought to the hospital, you choose to go to that hospital. How do you cover that in your health proxy to make sure that it is valid and that you do have it recognized by the hospital down there in Boston?
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, if you have had any issues with that.
Yeah, so basically under the full faith and credit clause, if the document, the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, if your healthcare directive was properly executed in the state where it was executed, it should be honored wherever you're receiving treatment, okay? And what Britton was hinting at, and I completely agree, is you're always going to have an easier time at a hospital or at a bank if they're looking at the form that they look at day in and day out, right? So we usually say to clients, we'll review the documents with them and say, listen, these are effective. I'm frankly much less concerned about updating a will from out of state if it still just says, give it all to my spouse and then to my children. Like, let's leave that alone, but let's freshen up your healthcare directive and your power of attorney so that people who are on the ground using it for a closing or to help make your medical decisions are looking at a form that they're accustomed to seeing. It's not necessary. Your out-of-state form should be effective, assuming it was properly executed wherever you got it. But
I guess my question
yeah.
is, it's executed here.
Yep.
You then go to Boston.
Yep.
That's a different kind of form that they would probably be used to seeing. So how do you make sure that this form that you executed in Maine would be able to be used down there?
So it
If
is.
you're not a resident of the state
Yep.
of Maine, I'm just.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So if the healthcare directive met the execution requirements in Maine, it is effective in Massachusetts or Alabama or Florida or wherever. Now, how many, and again, with healthcare directives, frankly, we go through fewer hoops than we do with financial powers of attorney. Is that fair? So I'm not I'm typically not as concerned about a properly executed healthcare directive being honored. But it's true, it is, your financial power of attorney is effective in any other state, assuming it was effective when it was executed here as well. It's just that sometimes you have to go through more layers to get to that outcome. Does that answer the question? So let's talk about healthcare decisions and advanced healthcare directives. I'm briefly going to burn through the components and the execution requirements, and then Britton can talk about some special considerations and why you want to go home tonight and do one. And there's going to be a link to where you can download one, probably at one of the printers out here. So a healthcare directive in Maine has several components. At least it always has the appointment of a healthcare agent to make decisions for you if you became incapacitated. And this is a circumstance where no one is going to let someone else make a healthcare decision for you unless they think you cannot appreciate the consequences yourself. Okay, so unlike the financial power of attorney, no one is going to authorize a surgery behind your back if you were awake and you could say yes or no yourself. It also includes a living will, what's colloquially referred to as a living will. We call it end-of-life decisions in our forms just because it talks about what your choices are about a number of things like artificial nutrition and hydration, life-sustaining treatment, those types of pain relief in the event that you're in an irreversible coma or a persistent vegetative state, or you have a terminal condition and you're no longer able to speak for yourself. It also designates who you would want to be your guardian if a court ever needed to appoint one. They shouldn't have to, although I'm sure Britton will elaborate about there are a certain subset of situations where we do have to apply for a guardianship, notwithstanding a healthcare directive. But the goal is not to have to do it. It talks about your wishes regarding organ donation. It gives a designation as to who is responsible for carrying out your funeral and burial instructions, which in our office, we're stressing the importance of this. We just recently saw our first dispute among family members about who would be authorized to do that. We didn't draft that healthcare directive. It was a New Hampshire form that didn't address burial instructions, and it turned into quite an upsetting ordeal for everyone. But if you say this is the person who's doing it, they will be able to do it, no questions asked. It also can designate a primary care physician. The execution requirements are that it's signed by the principal or at her direction, 2 witnesses, preferably witnesses who are not named as agents in the document, will witness it. We recommend notarization, but it's not required in Maine. And then I'm going to put up this slide before Britton gives us her thoughts, because this is the exact link you can put in your browser to see the Maine Hospital Association form that covers all of those issues and is excellent.
So I will take the opportunity, since I saw Mr. Judd Knox walk in the room, to acknowledge that this is actually, I think, part of the reason why we're having this today was a conversation that I had had with some hospital administrators on, you know what, I do these legal documents, but I'm not the doctor that actually has to abide by them, read them. So help me out. Like, how can I make this more effective for my clients? I think this is probably personally my most important document for my clients, because I want to know that if my clients are ever incapable of speaking their wishes, that I've done what I can to get those wishes on paper to help instruct their family members or their agents. And I actually do use a different form. That was one of the questions, was just how important is the state form that you can get at the hospital, and it is absolutely perfectly fine. I find it hard to read, so I stick to my own.
I use a different form too, in the interest of full disclosure. Like, we have some bells and whistles, but even if you just have that healthcare directive from the Maine Hospital Association, you will be...
Lawyers might be a little picky. We like
in
to
good
see
shape.
our own documents, so I'm glad to see I'm not alone. And so when I have people who come in for the Advanced Healthcare Directive, this is a document I spend a lot of time talking about with them, because as Mary Catherine has said, obviously you want to appoint someone that you can trust to make those healthcare decisions, to speak to your medical team when you cannot personally do that. And my favorite example is, my best friend is also an only child. I'm very close with her parents. And a few years ago, I had been hounding them to do their estate planning documents for years. And she called me, she goes, Mom and Dad finally went to see an attorney. They finally went and got their estate planning stuff done. They're down in Florida now. And I said, okay, great. And her tone changed. But I don't understand what happened. They didn't appoint me as the agent under their health care directive. Well, okay, I mean, she visibly, upset about this. Well, who did they appoint? Well, my cousin Anna. And I don't know, maybe they're mad at me. I said, well, your cousin Anna's a doctor. So that was a smart decision. So sometimes when clients come in and they're, I say, think about who it is that has what I call a similar life and death philosophy, because I haven't come up with a better one. So
It's a good.
feed me a better one. What is your life and death philosophy? What do you envision? Who is it that shares a similar vision, thought, and will have fewer problems executing what you put on that advanced healthcare directive? Additionally, the questions that Mary Catherine mentioned are pertaining to end of life, irreversible coma, vegetative state, terminal condition. How would you like to have your medical treatment proceeded with or not at those end of life? I see the looks on people's faces. You kind of look like my clients when you come in. This is such a fun topic of conversation, isn't it? So I tell people, do your advanced healthcare directive when you're feeling great on a nice sunny day. Go out for a picnic, grab the form, and just sit down and talk with your loved ones. People get very emotional around this topic, obviously. I try to take that, I use humor, if you can't tell, to try to take that out a little bit, because it applies to all of us, whether we like it or not. And I promise you, I have some parents who come in and say, I can't appoint my kids. I can't do this. I can't have them, have to make these decisions or have to deal with this for me. I've been there. I've done that. And on behalf of any child that you might ever say that about, I can promise you it is much easier for a child or a family member or a friend to do something for you if they know that that's your wish. If you have written it down, if you have provided guidance, I try to get very detailed even with my clients. It will be a lot easier on your loved one to make whatever decisions that will be hard if they know that they are making it in a decision in a way that you would want to have made. I don't know about Mary Catherine. One of my favorite questions, I have two favorite questions on the Advanced Healthcare Directive. One is the disqualification of certain surrogates. And that is where you can list people that, if you had your entire family sitting in front of your doctor, is there anybody you wouldn't want the doctor to listen to? And I think for the first few years of practice, I assumed, a estranged child or, spouse or something awful. And finally, it was like, well, no, if it's somebody that just doesn't share that life-death philosophy, if they keep them plugged up until the very end and you're like, no, let me go, or vice versa, maybe you don't want that person making your healthcare decisions. You love them, but you just don't want them to be the one to make those decisions. Yes?
Is this the same as what used to be called a medical power of attorney?
I'm glad you asked that. Is this the same as what used to be called a medical power of attorney? So I think states have different terms for this, and I will answer your question and segue into another important piece that we have today. Healthcare proxy, living will, which is now the Advanced Healthcare Directive. I don't know. So yes.
Some states have a separate HIPAA authorization. Most forms here embed the HIPAA authorization in the healthcare directive, so someone could call and get medical record information.
But if all of these things are in your medical power of attorney,
It doesn't matter what it's called as long as it answers the questions that the medical team is going to need
back to the
answered.
form and substance, if the substance is there, it would still have to have legal.
If the substance is there and it was appropriately executed in the state it was executed, when it was executed, you should be good.
Yes. So I'm going to touch really quick and go back to the other question that I put a lot of stock in on the Advanced Healthcare Directive is, it's like additional conditions, additional, I don't even remember, just a blank spot on the Advanced Healthcare Directive. And with my clients, I ask people to think outside the box a little bit. And the way I usually phrase it is, if there's something about you that makes you you, that if you cannot take care of, you would want someone else to do for you, I want to list that. In my attempt to get those wishes and those desires met for you, if you're not ever able to vocalize that yourself, that to me is very important, and I stress that with my clients. Now, sometimes I'm good. I don't have anything to add. But I say, if there is something about you, I had one woman say, you know what, I always wear earrings. I said, well, let's put that on there. If you can't put earrings in your ears, let's see if your caregivers will. Some people, I've listed favorite CDs for people. If you're in the hospital and you can't push play, I want to make sure that the person that's going to take care of that for you, let's guide them a little. What's your favorite music? Some people want to be visited by their dogs, or therapy pets. So I try to really customize my advanced healthcare directives to meet the needs of the clients and get you to think about, what are those things that are important to you that you might not even think about that you do every day, that we want to let someone else know that if they're caregiving for you, might help out a little bit. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes as well and say, oftentimes one of the questions that comes to me is an experience that a client has had. I've seen my in-laws or what have you, their do not resuscitate order wasn't followed through with, or they had a fight about their advanced healthcare directive. And unfortunately, because advanced healthcare directives, just because they're named different things, there is not an overarching federal guideline on advanced healthcare directives, what they should look like, and where they should be made available. It's very state specific, and so I tell people your advanced healthcare directive is only as good as it's known to exist. And so I have worked, I tell people, put a copy in your glove box if you can. Some facilities in the area, they require that all of their residents put a copy on the refrigerator. Have a copy in your purse. Give it to your doctor. Give it to your specialist. Give it to the records department at the hospital. As many places, I kind of say, stick it to your forehead if you can. As many places as you can get it disseminated, the better chance that someone in an emergency situation or when they're looking for advice on how to proceed with your health care, the better off that you're going to have those questions answered the way you would want them. And with that in mind, I also sit on a group in town that was formerly York SALT, Seniors and Law Enforcement Together. We have recently rebranded ourselves to Serving Our Seniors, yes, SOS. And we have been working as our initial rollout with the rebranding of the organization. We have been working with the first responders in town, York Police, York Ambulance, the Beach Fire, the Village Fire, to kind of customize for the town our version of the File of Life. The File of Life is a national organization that allows individuals to customize and kind of recreate this file. And we have done that, and we have some up front. And I encourage anyone that is interested to take one, to talk to Kate Ford or Detective Jamie Roby, who's been standing here so patiently. The York Police have been instrumental, previously with SALT and now with Serving Our Seniors. and us trying to, get some of this stuff out to the community. You're going to play a little Vanna White for me?
There's a magnet, and the DNR would go inside here if you had one.
So we, with some of the ambulance and the first responders, one of the things was, if they show up, if first responders show up at your home, if they don't find your advanced healthcare directive, if they don't find your emergency contact, if more importantly, they do not find your do not resuscitate order, they're going to do what they have to do to get you to the hospital alive and well. And so we have taken some of their suggestions, and inside of our little magnetized, which we hope you will put on your refrigerator, is a card. There's a place for your name, your emergency contact, your allergies, medical conditions, and medications. And so we are working with the first responders in town. They know if they go into a house for a call and you aren't able to vocalize what is going on to them, they will look on the refrigerator for those to see if there is one. And we, as Serving Our Seniors, are hoping that there will be one to help guide them. There was a little debate as to whether or not we make it big enough for someone's advanced health care directive. That it probably would not hold. It would hold a do not resuscitate order. And unfortunately, I have confirmed in these talks that if they don't see it, it doesn't exist. And so if you have strong opinions one way or another, if you have done a do not resuscitate order with your doctor, please grab one of these and put them on the refrigerator. If you have any questions about completing one, Officer Roby will stick around. Excuse me, detective. I'm just kidding. Yes, Kate.
We have the committee members who are here from Serving Our Seniors stand, because we are available to help you fill it out if you wanted to do it here.
Yes. If you are on the committee for Serving Our Seniors, can you stand up real quick so that if anybody has any questions, you guys can be, you can go to one of them after, and they will happily answer any questions about filling this out and how to keep it updated, keep it on your refrigerator. We are that serious about the fact that we want to make sure that if you have preferences on how these measures are treated and what is done, that we get that information out for you. Yes.
Something that's been expressed to me by a number of people is that we fill out the materials as we're supposed to. We turn them to our primary care physicians who say, thank you very much, and they'll register it. And I guess part of what we don't understand, and Jamie, maybe you would be a part of this too, is one would think that with technology today, that if someone came to my home, the first thing they would do as an emergency person is get onto the database and have access to the directive. Is there a reason that that isn't done, or is that a goal for anybody?
Good question. Very good question. Privacy.
I'm going to venture, there might be other people here that could answer more definitively. I just know from my experience at York Family that I don't know, as technology driven as we are, I don't know that they all talk to each other. I don't know that there is the timeline of which to necessarily stop and look. And I think also part of it is because there's no uniformity. And that's one thing that we worked with SALT years ago. I think we had worked on bumper stickers so that people would know if you were in a traffic accident, you could find them in your glove box. I think Century Hill says put them on their refrigerator. But there's no across the board, yes, if I spend the time to go into the system, I will find it there. I think, Jamie, do you have?
We do have an option at our police department here in York. We have a couple different things that we offer. The Good Morning program is a program that started about 10 years ago, and 10 years ago maybe you didn't feel like it was necessary, but maybe now you're thinking it might be a good option for you. And the Good Morning program, what it is it's a quick good morning phone call to the police department, and we have your information in our computer system, so you would come up And just, good morning, I'm fine, have a wonderful day. And so each day we know that it's just a quick little check-in, so that if tomorrow I don't have a phone call from you between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., I'm gonna call you. And then if I don't hear from you, I'm gonna call your neighbor or whoever you have for your emergency contact. And then if I still can't get to you, I'm gonna send a police officer to your house to make sure everything's okay. And that program's been very successful in checking in on folks that have been, maybe something happened overnight. With my grandmother, for example, she fell. We didn't have the Good Morning program. Nobody had checked in with her. It was over 30 hours that she was sitting on the floor, and I would hate for that to happen to anyone. So the Good Morning's a great program where we can put your information into our system, and we would get alerts if we didn't hear from you. That is always an option. It is a free service that we are happy to offer. The other thing we have on our computer program is an IMC program, but what it is if you wanted us to have special information, important information, we would get alerts. So if you called 911 and you had given us information that was important, we would get the alert. So when you call 911, or even if you call the police department and I put your name in, all of your information pops up on our communication specialist. That's what we call our dispatchers now, communication specialists. Your information would pop up, an alert would set off. There would be a bright alert, and we would read it. They would read it and then let the officers know, or let the ambulance, fire department members know that there's an alert. There is this medical condition. There is this. And then also we can have that emergency contact. Oh, we see he has a son. This is the phone number, and the officer would call. So those are two options. If you don't want to be a part of the Good Morning program, you can also just call up and say, hey, I want to make sure you know who I am. This is where I live. We do it for seasonal people. When they're gone for the winter, we check on their homes. We can also do it as far as those medical issues. If you have somebody in your home or you're living independently alone, I want the police to know that this is an issue. I want the police to know that they can get into my house this way. You know, that's another thing. Sometimes we get to homes and we've got to figure out a way to get in. I'm pretty good at crawling through windows, but it'd be really nice if I knew if you had a code or a key, or if your neighbor did. So I don't want to get off topic. I know you guys have valuable time here, but I'm going to be around. We're all going to be here to help you with these forms and explain anything, but that's an option that folks don't realize. And you know what? A lot of times people don't want to bother us. And that is just silly, because you live here and this is your community, and we're here to keep you safe. So bother us. Let us help you. It is no bother at all, and that's why you have a police department. And my primary job now is community relations, along with sensitive topics, sensitive crimes, but I'm community relations. So my name is on the back of these applications, and you can call me anytime, and if I don't get your call, I'll call you right back and answer any questions that you have. But like I said, I'll be here for a while, so thank you. Did that answered your question pretty good, didn't it? Okay.
Yes.
I think this is a great program, and I encourage people to participate in it. However, my experience with a stainless steel refrigerator is that magnets don't hold on to it, so you may want to tape it, or if the side is not. But my refrigerator sits in a cabinet, so it wouldn't work.
All right.
But my real question is, in the state of Maine, do you have the option of specifying in your papers that when you die, you want to go directly to a crematorium if you know that you want to be cremated? You can bypass a funeral home. Is that legal in the state of Maine? I've had friends who've been able to do it in other states.
We did that with
and
my husband in
that's
Maine.
my preference. I don't know if it's legal in Maine, but it's what I want. Is how do I make that happen?
So, all right.
I don't know the answer to that question. I'll be
All right,
interested.
If you don't know the answer to the question, then I will not answer your question in this way. First, let me repeat, because the first part was actually very important. With these magnets that we are suggesting, if you fill out the information and stick it on the side, it was just pointed out, if you have a stainless steel refrigerator, it is not magnetized. But usually I think the sides are, at least mine is. So that's why all of my kids' artwork is on the side of my refrigerator. So hopefully the side is magnetized. Then the next question is funeral planning, and can you specify in the Advanced Healthcare Directive that you would like to bypass the funeral home and go straight to a crematorium? I don't know the answer to that question. But ironically, it had just been brought up where I think that that is not possible. And I want to say it was my legal assistant that found out that you have to, in working with another client, that you have to go through a funeral home. I don't know if there's anybody for any other reason that might know differently, but I honestly don't know.
They offer direct crematory services, some funeral homes.
Okay.
So you fill out the paperwork with them. And if they're in a nursing home or a facility, they have the copy. They know that. They call that funeral home. The person from the funeral home comes to take them and they do direct.
So
So
maybe
funeral
some
homes
funeral
have both.
homes
They
do.
cremation and a funeral, so you have to find one. But New Hampshire is legal.
The whole thing was to bypass the expense of a funeral home.
There are ways in which to do it. I would say, with that in mind, that funeral planning is an option. And I say that only because sometimes people do not seem to recognize that you can go to a funeral home, whatever funeral home you might have experience with or a preference for, and sit down and discuss with them what you would or would not want. And I typically remind my clients that it's just part of estate planning. It's not a fun part, but for some people that care about what they do or do not have, at the end, I tell people to plan. I know we're running out of time. I would like to, I've been hogging the mic.
I've been holding my hand up several times now.
Yes.
I'm just curious, going back to the medical primary care physician. What if you don't have one? What if you don't want to have one? Yet all this paperwork has to be signed by a doctor. So how can you have an advance directive if you don't want a doctor to handle it?
So if I understand your question, how do you take care of things if you do not want the advanced health care directive?
If you do not want a doctor to have
The
the
doctor
doctor
sign
sign
it.
off on it.
Okay, so a doctor, if you do not want a doctor to sign off on your advanced health care directive, a doctor does not have to. A doctor has to sign off on your do not resuscitate order, but not the advanced health care directive. So the forms that Mary Catherine and I both do, those are forms that you would come in as the client. It would be a family matter, so whomever you're appointing as the agent under that advanced health care directive to make your health care decisions if you are unable to do, that's the form where you would appoint that. That was also the form where you can direct how your end-of-life care would be taken and treated, but there's nothing about that that has to be signed by a doctor. Now,
And you're putting the do not resuscitate into the advance directive.
in my advanced health care directive, I have a consent for do not resuscitate. It does not contain the do not resuscitate order that you will find in the form you can get from the hospital. The actual do not resuscitate has to be signed by your doctor. In my advanced health care directives, I just say that you would consent or you would not consent to the signing of a do not resuscitate order. You're welcome. And just, Mary Catherine and I will both be here. I have hogged the mic, and I know you guys have to get back. But if anybody has any additional questions, is there anything you would like to?
I don't think so, except for that we promised we would cover guardianships and conservatorships, and all you really need to know is lots of things need to happen, and it's going to be the most painful way to get a surrogate decision maker. And the rules are changing in July to make it more laborious to get a surrogate decision maker if you don't have a financial power of attorney or an advanced healthcare directive. So it's one of the best tools that you can give your family to help take care of you if you needed that assistance in the future. What do you think?
I would just say, as far as guardianships and conservatorships, don't make them necessary. I do them. I don't like them. Under a power of attorney and advanced health care directive, the beauty of them is that you, capacitated, go into an attorney's office, sit with them, discuss what these issues are, what they mean, what the jobs would be, the authority that you're granting these people, and then you get to choose who those people will be that you are imparting all of this authority. A guardianship, a conservatorship, it's who goes to the court and says they will take on the responsibility of managing you or your money. It's not necessarily the person that you would want to appoint. And there are certain situations with a power of attorney. Usually if someone, the only time I end up with a guardianship is usually when there is a power of attorney in place is when someone has lost capacity, they are still at home, and they are no longer safe, and they're refusing to go elsewhere. Other than that, you pretty much can take care of everything you need to with the power of attorney and the Advanced Healthcare Directive. So I beg of you to get one done if you don't already have one.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Oh, one more question in the back. Okay, thanks for coming.